What's up, party people? Today we are looking at a comment from Festival Vlog. Hey Mo, hey yo, could you make a video about different stats and options? Example, physical res, abnormal vit, accuracy, acceleration, DDR, and more. I think this is missing on YouTube and it would help many beginners of the game. I was often asked in-game. Thanks a lot and good luck. Festival Vlog, I am absolutely going to cover this today. This is a simple video, and yeah, something like this should be on YouTube. I 100% agree with you. So let me just scooch my screen a little bit here, and we are just going to delve right into this. I'm not going to make this like a super formal video. I'm just going to go through and I'm going to tell you what I know about each of these stats, and hopefully it'll be helpful. So when you open up your stat windows for new players and for players who might have been playing for a while, you don't always know what everything means. So my goal here is to just kind of go through it and hopefully explain all the different stats here and what they do. So very basic to start with here: strength, dex, heal, spirit, right? Strength, physical attack; dex, range attack; heal is your health; and spirit is your magic attack. Basically, anytime you add stats into here, it's going to increase your overall attack, in addition to other attack items. Attack, range attack, magic attack, I feel like those are self-explanatory. Defense, you have your physical damage reduction here. That is any physical damage that you take gets reduced by having a higher defense. And in addition to this, I believe that range damage goes into defense as well. Someone might have to correct me on that, but I believe that defense would also reduce some range damage dealt by a Consorus Summoner or a Hunter. Magic resistance, pretty straightforward. Once again, magic resistance, higher the magic resistance, the more magic resistance reduction you're going to have. Also, for those of you who don't know, there's a little percent button here, so you can convert these things into percentages if you're curious. I personally like to have it on the percentage. I feel like it makes more sense to me. So let's continue down the list here. Fire res, ice res, lightning, poison, curse, and dark. All of those are going to be pretty self-explanatory. Those resistances resist damage from those types of damage. Now, where does this come into play? Certain dungeons deal certain types of damage. For example, if you do like Undo Mizoki, there's a I believe it's a poison. No, not poison. It's like a dark or curse room. It does curse damage. So if you're really struggling in that room, you could try to stack curse res and it would help you in there. Mostly, though, this comes into play with PvP. For example, if you're fighting a mage, the elemental resistance is going to be very useful. If you're fighting like a summoner, poison resistance is going to be very useful. A Segnal curse resistance or a Segripper curse resistance is good. And dark res would be up against like a black wizard, for example. All of those are super useful. Accuracy is your hit rate. Basically, if this is not at 100%, you have a chance to miss on your hit. Your block here basically is a chance to block a hit completely. So obviously, if you're going for a max PvP build, getting your block maxed out, which actually isn't that hard to do because of like Helion stuff. I don't have good rolls on mine, but a lot of Helion gear has block on, or one of them has block on it. I can't remember which one it is. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm crazy. I don't know. Anyway, I know that my guard arm does. So, higher block, good for PvP. It's actually good for PvE as well, too, because you can block monster damage. Guard is the exact same thing as block, basically. You have a chance to guard and completely reduce the damage. So if you get these both maxed out, you can be pretty tanky. Skill acceleration makes you cast your skills faster. Pretty self-explanatory. Movement speed is how fast you move. Pretty self-explanatory. Attack speed is how fast your basic attack is. So this isn't going to affect like your skill animations or anything like this. It's just your basic attack. And stuff like boxing gloves can increase the rate of that. Classes like Segripper, for example, if they use boxing gloves and have high attack speed, they still hit really high and they attack fast. It's very useful. Okay. Mastery. Mastery is a little bit more complicated, but basically what Mastery does is it reduces your target's block and guard rate, right? So if your target has a high block and guard rate, you can counter that with a high Mastery. That's basically how that works. Your Vitality is going to be your critical damage. Your critical damage is your multiplier to your damage when you crit. For PvE and PvP, Vitality is super important. Even more than attack, getting your Vitality maxed out at 400% is going to really increase your damage. I get a lot of questions about how to increase my damage, and honestly, guys, the number one thing is vitality. When you're trying to initially really get your damage up there, maxing out vitality or getting vitality up makes a really big difference. Destroy. Destroy decreases critical hit resistance, and in order to do that, I have to explain critical hit resistance first. So basically, this is your resistance to critical hits, right? You know, the name kind of explains it itself. When you're fighting another player, if you have high critical hit resistance, it'll be harder for them to hit you with a critical hit, right? Because the critical hit's obviously going to deal more damage. But let's say I have critical hit resistance maxed out, and it's really hard for people to crit me. Well, they can counter that with having high destroy. High destroy reduces that critical hit resistance and gives them a chance to hit through my critical hit resistance. So a lot of this stuff counters different parts of it, as you'll see. Critical or critical hit rate. This is your chance to hit a critical hit. And this maxes out at 75%. Once again, if you have this maxed out and your opponent has this maxed out, it's going to be very hard for you to crit them. However, destroy can kind of put you over the edge there and make sure that you're hitting them. And now, there's another piece to that. Critical damage defense. This is your critical hit resistance. I don't know why it's called critical hit defense there on any item you see. Like, for example, the one of these, like your horn, you'll see that there is a crit damage res. That's what that is. That's the same as crit damage defense. I don't know why it's different. They're just sloppy. But basically, this is your reduction in damage on a critical hit. Okay? So basically, when your opponent's hitting you with, 400% critical damage, if you have a high crit damage defense, it's going to reduce what that critical hit damage is. I don't know exactly how the math calculates out. I don't know if it's number for number, but I do know that this will significantly reduce the damage from critical hits from your opponents. And this is a super important item when it comes to PvP, because otherwise players who have really high damage are going to just roll you. Now, speaking of damage reduction, let's go into our three main damage reduction stats. That is damage res, PvP damage res, and PvE damage res. Now, damage res is universal. Damage res is going to reduce damage from players, and it is also going to reduce damage from monsters. However, it's primarily used for reducing damage from players. PvP damage res is specifically from players, okay? And the PvE damage res is from monsters. So this is like PvE or PvM or however you want to look at it. So if you're going for like a more PvE build, maxing out PvE res and DDR are going to be really good. Obviously, if you're doing a PvP build, PvT damage res and damage res are going to be very important. Getting those maxed out will significantly reduce a lot of the damage that you get from your opponents. However, with all the damage boosting items there are in the game now, you will find that even with these max, players can still hit you very hard, which is where that crit damage defense comes into play. Abnormal res. This is another very important item in the game, or stat in the game, specifically for PvP, but also for PvE. Abnormal resistance reduces the chance of a status effect. Okay, now what are some status effects? A lot of those will be like if you have a signal, for example. The signal can sleep you, right? Abnormal res can reduce the chance of that happening. Or they can debuff you. Abnormal res can prevent, the debuff from happening. Stuns. For example, with my Loken, I have a bunch of stuns. If someone has high abnormal res, it'll be much harder for me to stun them and, get my combos off. So abnormal res is really big. In PvP, it can really be life or death because for some classes, they can stun you for a very long time and it can be very hard to tank through that. So if you can reduce some of those stuns, your survivability is going to be much higher. Like I said, this can also be very useful in PvE. For example, you have Karen's Firepot where the monsters can bleed you. This abnormal res stat can reduce the chance of them hitting that bleed debuff on your character. So very important. Melee damage res, range damage res. Both of these... I feel like there should be a magic too. Is there not? Maybe there isn't. I don't know, guys. This game's kind of scuffed sometimes. But basically, self-explanatory, right? Melee damage res, range damage res. Self-explanatory. HP recovery, your HP recovery per second. MP recovery, MP recovered second, right? HP, MP, pretty straightforward. Shield, same thing. An example, so if you're... I can show you how that goes up, for example. So shield recovery, I would recover 49.6 shield per second. But if I throw on like a costume that has some PK shield recovery like that, you can see that it goes up to 488 per second, which actually can be pretty substantial while you're in a PvP, especially if you're pretty good at tanking already. So that kind of thing is there. Defeat resistance. Defeat resistance is your resistance to knockback. Knockback comes into play in a bunch of different places. Some classes knock you back a ton because they have it in their skills, and that would be like the Baggy or the Sagita Hunter. However, anytime a character crits you, it has the potential to knock you back. So the higher your defeat resistance is, the higher the chances that you will reduce or resist that knockback. And the knockback can be nasty because you can't use skills or do anything while it's happening. That's how that works. Cooldown reduction. This is also kind of a cool skill. Basically, this reduces the amount of time it takes for your skill to cool down. Pretty self-explanatory. This can be really nice for some skills, especially if you're trying to keep buffs up. If you're playing a class where you are like a wizard or a Loken or a mage and you have these defensive skills or vital drain with the Baggy, having a high cooldown reduction can actually be pretty overpowered because you can keep your defensive skill up much longer, or not longer, but you can cast it faster. So it can make you pretty scary, as well as, high hitting skills, right? So good skill. Cancel abnormal res. Well, as you guys know, everything's built to cancel everything. So basically, this just cancels abnormal resistance, right? So I have a super high abnormal resistance, but some players can't hit their sleeps and their stuns on me. Well, if they take the time to stack some cancel abnormal res, it's going to increase their chance of hitting through my abnormal res, and then they can get off their sleep or their stun. That's basically how that one works. PvP attack is going to be an increase to your attack in PvP only. Same thing with PvP damage bonus. Both of those stack together, and they will increase your damage when you're fighting other players. That is why you have like your normal PvE type weapon versus like a Zudo or Zudo awakened weapon, which gives you PvP attack, PvP damage bonus. You'll be like, oh, but why is my attack so much lower when I have that on? Well, it's because it's not for PvE, right? Obviously, this I'd be hitting much higher in PvE. However, if you look down here, these stats get much higher, and that is going to be better for PvP. So that is kind of how that works. I'm going to switch my weapon back, though. I like how the other one looks better. Gotta look my best, right? Physical penetration, magical penetration. This is going to go against physical damage reduction and magical damage reduction, right? So say you are a mage and someone has really high magic res. Well, if you can put some time into your magical penetration through gems in your gloves, for example, your magic damage is going to hit more through that magical resistance, right? So basically, there's defensive skills and then there's offensive skills to counter them, right? And it's kind of like all over the board, and that's what makes building your character so complicated and unique in this game. But I think that pretty much covers everything. I can imagine that this could be kind of overwhelming and complicated, but I hope that this at least gives you guys an idea of what each of these stats do, and if you're new to the game, you kind of have an idea of what you might want to be going for. The one thing I will say here, like important stats, like if you're like full PvE, you're trying to go do dungeons and stuff like that, like I said, vitality is going to be super important, maxing out critical hit is going to be super important, PvE res, damage res, block, guard, all those are, I don't know if guard works in PvE as well, but I know block does, so like block is really nice. Even melee damage resistance, that's also really good. The other thing that's kind of interesting about melee damage resistance, I don't know if it's still working this way, but it's any damage that's like close to you. So even if it's like a magic attack or like a ranged attack, if it's close to you, it still counts as melee damage. I don't know if it's still working that way, but I know at one point it was. Sorry, I'll just throw that in there. It's probably making this even more confusing. But yeah, HP recovery is really good for PvE. If you're looking for PvP, obviously your resistances are super important. Block, guard, defense, magic resistance, damage res, PvP damage res, abnormal res, crit damage, hit resistance. All these are... Sorry, excuse me, guys. All these are super important. Yeah. And maybe I'll make another guy in the future kind of going over what you want to focus on depending on what your goal is in the game. But yeah, let's see. Did I answer or did I get everything that was in that post? Sorry, I have to look at my other screen. Physical res we went over, abnormal vit, accuracy, acceleration, DDR, and more. I believe we went over and more. So it should be good, guys. I hope you found this video useful. Questions, suggestions, as always, you can leave them in the comments. If you did find this video helpful, make sure to leave a like. And yeah, and if you want more content, subscribe. All that means a lot to me. You know, keeps me going with this content. And yeah. You guys are great. Until next time, take care.